Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 52nd episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and my guest co-host this week is indeed a familiar voice to you all. He is returning all the way back from episode 3 of this very podcast, which dropped almost a year ago. Impossible to believe, but it is in fact true. My guest co-host this week is Blaze Keller. Hello, Blaze. How are you?
I'm good. Crazy that it's been a year.
It sure has. And I was thinking, and I'm going to go back and look at this right now, but I feel pretty confident that it was like a year ago this weekend, Blaze, that we were recording this very podcast.
You know what? I can't remember really beyond a week ago. So if it's right, you'll know.
Fair. So it was December 3rd of 2022,
okay.
In fact, or sorry, excuse me, December 2nd of 2022, in fact.
Okay,
Yeah, so just about a year ago. That's crazy. And now here you are, back again.
Oh my gosh. So what have you learned over this year in doing this podcast and creating it from scratch and really making it your own?
Yeah. That's a great question. I feel like this whole thing has just kind of flown right by. Honestly, like it has really felt like a whirlwind, honestly, Good. Blaze. It is. And I feel like, I have, really gotten hopefully good at the thing. I think that's maybe like a part of it. But I think, if I had to pick like one thing, right, I really feel like I have learned how important this is, right? Like, honestly, and like, because I obviously started the podcast because I think it's important, right?
Right.
But like, I have gotten so much, connected to so many people who like are intimately involved in these cases, or just people who care about it so much, and like to have the opportunity, right, to talk about these things, to give people that platform, who don't have it on their own, right? Like that's the whole reason why I want to have my own platform, right? Is that way I can lend it out to other people and give it to them once a week. And so that's one of the big thing, right? Is just it's like true crime is not just all about entertainment. It's not all just about hearing it and being like, whoa, that's crazy, but like doing something with it. And so I'm hoping I'm doing that. I'm hoping I'm getting through to people. But man, Blaze, it has been a ride to get there. So. And
you've had many bottles of wine since?
Yeah.
Along the way, I should say.
Yeah, just a few. Yeah. Not to say that I wouldn't have drank a similar number of bottle of wine if I didn't had this podcast.
Okay.
Because everyone knows how much I love wine. But
it is good.
It's for a very good purpose.
Yes.
So speaking of that, let's get into our wine of the week, Blaze.
All right.
So this week we are drinking Bread and Butter's Merlot. It's a classic California Merlot with luscious notes of plum, black cherry, and cocoa. Perfect when enjoyed with good food and good company. So talk about the good company. All we need is some good food, Blaze, and like we'll be fine.
We've got the good company. I don't know about the food.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing in my bed.
Yeah, I have some leftover pizza in the other room.
Have you had this before?
I have not. And I tried to very intentionally to pick out wines for this podcast that I've never had before. And I just took a sip, and again, I've been like getting on the Merlot train. Everyone knows I'm usually on the Cabernet train. But I've been getting toward a Merlot-y kind of flavor because I really like those, like the big bolds. But it's a little too sweet for me in my opinion. But let me see how I feel about this.
I mean, I have no frame of reference. I usually stick with whites. So this could be really great, or this could be rotten grapes. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, it's also like all subjective, right? Two Blaze, I feel like.
Also that.
Point being, love the wine, really into this one. Big, bold flavors, fruitier, right? Fruitier-esque, I would argue. Yeah. But Blaze,
yes,
we have talk about coming in hot. Mm-hmm. That parlays very, very well into the case for the week, both literally and figuratively, because woo.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I have no reference. Like, this is all going to be new to me.
Cool. Oh, good. I'm so glad you're going to take this all in raw, because that's the only way to do this case for sure. So,
yes, it
Blaze,
is.
Way back when we were talking about the Biological Resource Center, right? Again, on episode 3 of this podcast, I could not stop thinking about the case I'm going to tell you about, because it is like so similar, but arguably way wilder, right? And so I've been holding my breath to tell you this for a year about this, absolutely just too insane to believe story, but it is 100% real. This week, I want to tell you about Ray Marsh, the Walker County Cremator. Blaze, I don't even really know where to begin with this case. I truly don't. And so let me begin with just kind of like setting the scene for you of where we're talking about this week. We are in Walker County, Georgia. It's directly south of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I'm at right now. And it's a pretty rural area, tucked away in the mountains and real home-like. It's just kind of like one of those areas that you settle down in to raise a family because, again, nothing bad ever happens in those towns. Right? And so as a result, Walker County is just one of those counties where everyone knows everyone, and that's all that you need, right? And in the 90s and early 2000s, one of those families entrenched in that community was the Marshes, primarily Tommy Marsh and his son, Ray Marsh. They were a nice family, according to the people who lived there, really well respected and well liked in the community, and the respect for their family went back generations. And in 1996, the family had built up a reputation as really well-respected business people. Tommy owned the only crematory in town. And look, I know it's like ironic being a true crime podcaster and all, but I stay far away from death. People who are in this industry just absolutely creep me out, but it's an essential service, right? And it was extra essential for Walker County back in 1996 because before the Tri-State Crematory opened in 1982, there were no options for people in the surrounding region from Georgia to Tennessee to Alabama to have their loved ones cremated. If you wanted to be cremated, you had to pay an arm and a leg to do business with the crematory hours away. And look, I totally understand. I have zero interest in being buried. 100% I want to be cremated, and this should absolutely serve as my living will, period.
Why do you want to be cremated? I actually genuinely want to know. Why do you want to be cremated?
Well, listen, I don't like the idea, right, of dying and for the rest of eternity, my like the maggots and the bugs and the stuff are just crawling over my body. Like I worked really, really hard for this, right? And like I don't want that. I don't want that at all. And so I want, but listen, also too, from again the Biological Resource Center from before, we were talking about this previously, and I remember distinctly saying I want to be cremated and I need someone to watch it happen because I don't trust these people.
You want no body, no crime. You Correct. Said this was my body, so you bugs that need food, sorry, you're starving.
Go somewhere else.
Sorry, I ate and you guys are not. And then I guess you really want to give somebody in your family or a friend some trauma to talk about down the line with watching you get incinerated.
You hit all the main points. Thanks for that.
I mean, you know what? Work.
Yeah, I also would really enjoy once I am cremated, right? Like I want because I want to be like I want my ashes to be sprinkled on a beach somewhere or somewhere like real serene. That's what I want.
Okay.
But again, someone needs to see it happen, and part of the reason why I need someone to see it happen is because of this case right here. So
yes, all right. So come back to this podcast if he tries to fight anybody down the line.
That is correct.
All right.
Yes, I hope my lawyer is listening right now. So the Marshes were trying to, fill the void that the community had in terms of, crematories and options after death. But they did so in a bit of a rare way, Blaze. So the Tri-State Crematory didn't deal directly with the public. Instead, they dealt directly with funeral homes. So if you wanted your loved one cremated, all you had to do was go through the funeral home, one-stop shop kind of thing, and they would take care of the rest. Now, this is a bit of a non-traditional way for crematories to operate. Most crematories have customers come in, they do the sale, etc. Everything's cool. And it's just another item on your checklist after your loved one passes away.
Okay.
But in the case of the Tri-State Crematory, they wanted to do business in other ways for one reason or another. And there might be a strong reason for that, Blaze. You see, the state coroner's office regulates crematories for inspection purposes. It's in state law.
Okay.
But the loophole in Georgia state law at the time was that crematories don't need to submit to state inspections if they don't do business directly with the public, but instead do business directly with funeral homes.
Oh.
And Tommy had apparently been pretty well aware of this loophole in Georgia state law because in 1994, he had apparently called in a favor to a politician friend of his to ask how he can keep state investigators out of the crematory.
This sounds very bad.
Yeah,
Also,
it's not getting set up well. That's for sure.
no, also that's really odd that at that time, like, if you went through a funeral home, there was no state checking, because there's been times where like there's been murder and someone's been told that they want a cremating and then you can't exhume the body.
Right.
That sounds like a problem.
It does sound like a problem. Yeah. Yeah. And like, again, I don't, from my understanding of like what this loophole looked like, it wasn't like a loophole in terms of like they specifically said that if you don't deal with the public, I could be wrong, but they didn't like specifically say if you don't deal directly with the public, you don't need a state inspection, right? I think it was more so just like the language just missed these kinds of crematories, which happens. I suppose you can't think of every possible case scenario, but again, it causes some problems. Spoiler alert, right?
Were they burning people in like a back alley dumpster?
Oh, way worse than that, Blaze.
Oh my God.
Way worse than
No. Well, okay, carry on. Tell me more.
Oh, I sure will. Regardless of the reason, though, why the Marshes had structured their business the way that it did, state investigators never conducted any kind of official inspection at the business, and the family's business model worked. Again, the crematory was the only one for miles, and it was successful. It had attracted a lot of really wealthy individuals in the area, and it was doing business with some well-established funeral homes that didn't have any other crematory to do business with before the Tri-State Crematory opened. But in 1996, Tommy Marsh had gotten sick, too sick to run the business, so he passed it along to his son, Ray, to run. Ray dropped out of his senior year of school to take on the family business, and he continued to run it for years with great success. Between 1996 and 2002, the crematory had apparently taken in about 2,000 bodies to cremate, and things were going really, really well for them. But in 2002, everything changed. That's when investigators got a tip from someone walking their dog near the crematory who made a horrific discovery that would shatter the peace in the quiet community for decades. Crime Over Wine is sponsored by BetterHelp. As someone who's used therapy for years, I know that finding a therapist can sometimes be a stress on its own, juggling your full-time job, your family, your friends, your podcast, and trying to find the right therapist on top of that can almost feel impossible. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist that works for you on your terms. It's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to one of 33,000 licensed professional therapists in as little as a few days. And because finding a new therapist is a lot like finding a new bottle of wine, if you don't jive with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by going to betterhelp.com/crimeoverwine. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crimeoverwine for 10% off your first month. Join over 4 million people who decided to get help and get happy with BetterHelp. On February 15th, 2002, the dog walker was out in the woods on the property of the crematory, but just off of the main part of the property, when they came across what they thought to be decomposing human remains. Just out in the woods, stacked together, and a lot of them.
Like just thrown?
Just out there.
Ew, okay.
And what was strange about them was that they were definitely dead, of course, but they didn't look like murdered necessarily. Like, they were mostly intact, rotting, of course, but they weren't immediately concerned for their safety. They didn't really notice, like, wounds, is what I'm trying to say.
Just a pile of dead bodies.
Yeah, right.
Okay. I'm putting myself in that scene. I'm taking my now disabled French bulldogs. Well, one of them's disabled. On a walk, we find a dead body. My first reaction, probably puke. I have smelt a dead body before, and they don't smell great.
Yeah. Okay. Do need to know more about that comment.
Long story short, just somebody died. Yeah. I mean, I would be really concerned. What, 2002? So on the heels of 9/11, just a bunch of dead bodies. I've got questions.
Well, the dog walker, their immediate reaction was call the police. They called an anonymous tip to the police department, and the local sheriff's office heads out to check things out. They show up to the crematory and head out toward where the dog walker told them to go. And as they're heading out there, they find even more sets of human remains. They were, again, stacked up on top of each other all around the property.
So are we talking on those warehouse pallets, just stacked on top of each other? Is it in a hole, in a garbage bag? I think that does, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, so don't come for me, but if I saw them in just on top of each other, I would be more concerned than on a pallet. The pallet adds a little bit of okay, maybe they're just going to move them all together into the fire pits and burn,
Sure. I will just, put a little asterisk. I don't think that's how cremations work. I think that you'd put it on a little thing and then shove it into a little thing.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's not what happened here anyways. So
you're not hanging out at crematoriums on the side?
Nope. Can't say I am. Again, don't really enjoy death at all, but
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Well, it was pretty obvious, to police that something wasn't right here. These weren't bodies, waiting to be cremated at this crematory. They weren't being stored properly, and there were dozens of them at first glance. They were out in storage sheds, in vaults, scattered all inside and outside of the property, stacked up on top of each other, and some of them appeared as though they were there for weeks, months, and maybe even years based on their levels of decomposition.
And this is in Georgia.
That is correct.
Okay, so you're putting dead bodies outside for who knows how long. We're into, February?
Correct.
I mean, it's cold, but it's not
not that cold.
We're not in the Arctic. You're not conserving these bodies.
Yeah, we're not in Madison, Wisconsin.
The smell?
Yeah.
Alone? Yuck.
Well, hold that thought for sure, because there's a little bit of an explanation there, potentially.
Okay.
And I don't fully buy it, but it is a possible explanation.
Okay.
But, initially, police think that they found 49 bodies, Blaze, which is an insane amount. But then they keep looking. They found bodies hidden deep in the woods on the property, dumped into tanks, and some were found stuffed into the back of a hearse on the property. Now, again, investigators at this point are obviously weirded out by this whole thing, but they aren't really suspecting that there is anything violently criminal here. Yes, they are finding a ton of dead bodies, but none of them appear to have been outright murdered, at least not at first glance, right?
Right.
Plus, they're at a crematory. Surely there is a logical explanation to some extent.
You go to the circus, you see clowns. It makes sense.
Okay, sure. But, at this point, they are dealing with a massive hazardous situation here, right? And so local police end up calling in a federal disaster team to survey this whole 16-acre property. They bring in anti-contamination suits, a portable morgue all the way from Maryland, and dozens of agents to see what is going on here. And they put the property on lockdown. The federal teams end up searching the property for 6 weeks. And this is, as you can imagine, a complicated process. They found some bodies in mass graves, up to 40 bodies in 10-foot pits on the property, Blaze.
Oh, no.
Other bodies had decomposed into each other. In some cases, they were described as just a mush of DNA mixing in with other corpses. No. By the end of it, Blaze, get ready for this, investigators believe they had found 339 bodies on the property. And some of them, they believe, had been there for as many as 20 years.
I don't get it. What? At what point do you just say, you know what, take this body and just throw it out back?
Yeah.
And then 20 years later, you've got, almost 400 or something bodies just lying around.
Well, and again, because to your point from before, right, about okay, well, maybe they're waiting to be cremated. Sure, I could buy 2 or 3, 4 or 5, maybe up to 10. Okay, that's in the queue. But not 339.
Well, and, you know, like, obviously you're dead, so it doesn't really matter to me, it doesn't really matter what happens to your body. Like, you're dead. So, like, if you want to be put outside, fine, whatever. Put me outside until I burn. But obviously there's there's some people who are going to care about, like, Grandma Susan sitting outside. You can't do that to Susan. Obviously, I have questions about the crematorium. At this point, is it really a crematorium? Like, and also, how does bodies over 20 years not raise, like, any sort of red flags?
Yeah, well, and apparently, you know, Blaze, kind of what you're talking about before, like, there wasn't, like, much of an overwhelming smell coming from the property. The funeral homes were, of course, required to embalm bodies before sending them to the crematory, and so that apparently had prevented much of the smell becoming, like, super unbearable or noticeable, but, like, to be clear, like, when officers showed up, like, the smell was still pretty darn strong, just not as strong as I think that most of us would expect it to be.
Rotting flesh without organs, I can't imagine just smells great, but maybe that's just, like, what Georgians smell.
Well, at this point, you know, people were getting wind of what had happened at the Marshes crematory, and they were pissed at the prospect of their loved ones not being cared for after their death. And when they find out about this massive scandal that rocked Walker County, Georgia, they are left wondering what they had in their loved ones' urns and the necklaces that they made in their memories for all of these years.
Again, I don't care what happens to me once I die and my body, the exterior shell of my body. But I'm putting myself in other people's shoes, seeing their grandparents, loved ones, you know, die. That would be really upsetting, especially, like, if you're promised, you know, hey, this is your grandma's ashes, and you find out she's just rotting out back with the rest.
Yeah. Well, and, like, it's such an intimate thing, right? Like, this is such an emotional time for everybody. And, like, for a lot of these people, right, like, I think about the people who have been there potentially for 20 years. Like, these are people, like, their families and their loved ones had, like, come to terms with this at this point, right? Like, mourned, grieved, everything's okay.
Yeah.
And then to, like, have this, you know, just bring this right back to the forefront. Man, right? Well, you know, Blaze, you know, as crazy as this story is so far, what happens next is even crazier.
Hello, Crime Over Wine listeners. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather.
We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder.
We bring you the good, the badass, and the crime.
Each week, we bring you stories from missing and murdered
to survivors and women who empower you.
And of course, some mom talk sprinkled in.
Check us out wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother, Like Murder.
And give us a follow on social media so that we can say hi.
Okay, love you, bye.
Okay, love you, bye.
Get ready for that big test with Study.com. Study.com offers learning materials and test prep, even LSAT study prep guides for all of my legal nerds listening. Unfortunately, there aren't any wine study guides, and believe me, I did check. Listeners can get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level using the promo code CrimeOverWine. Again, that's promo code CrimeOverWine, no spaces, for 30% off your first 3 months at Study.com. Learn faster, stay motivated, study smarter with our sponsor, Study.com. Okay, Blaze, so how are you enjoying your Merlot? Are you a Merlot guy now, or?
No, but it is good. I mean, it's not bad. Again, I have no frame of reference. I mean, these could really just be like Concord grapes, Juicy Juice grapes, whatever they sold us as kids. No, it's not. It's really not bad. Again, I'm not a big red wine person. I think red wines tend to be a little bit more gritty. Like, I feel there's a grittiness to it. This is smooth like a white wine. There is no grittiness to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's definitely a Merlot for sure. Merlots are smoother but are known for big fruity flavors.
Okay.
Which is definitely true here for sure. I don't get a whole lot of fruity flavors in here, but I do get big, bold, and I get on the drier side for sure.
Yeah. I got a big glass to, like, air it out. I don't know. Is that like a thing that you people do with red wines?
Well, yeah. So you are supposed to, with especially with these kind of red wines, you're supposed to have like a big bulb. Like you're supposed to have a nice big one to let all of the the flavors breathe, and then to have it in you're actually in ideal scenarios, you're supposed to have like a pretty thin openings. That way, it kind of just like all funnels through one spot. So little wine class at 101 for you.
Okay, you said that there was. I'm trying to remember what you said about the notes of this. Okay, plum, black cherry, and cocoa. I don't find any cocoa in this. You tell me that there's.
Oh no, me neither.
You tell me that there's chocolate. Liar.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely don't get any cocoa mocha flavors in here.
No,
I 100% agree with that.
I would say though, for anybody like me who's a special kind of woman because you're a man and don't like red wine, this one isn't bad.
Yeah, actually, you know what I said about the cocoa. I just took another sip, and I actually do get a little cocoa in the aftertaste.
Really?
Like very subtly, very very subtly, but it is there.
I truly don't get it. I get a lot of plum though. I think it's definitely heavy on the plum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, plum in the front for sure. I definitely agree with that.
Well, I probably won't buy it again just because I don't like red wine. But you know what? It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend this to somebody who doesn't like red wines and wants maybe just like a sweet.
Yeah. Listen, this is like a very relaxing red for me too, right? Like I could definitely see like Real Housewives, chilling on the couch Friday night kind of thing.
Ooh, and would go great with like a steak, some potatoes. Yeah. Ooh.
Yep. Yeah, I see like a nice like charcuterie board spread here.
Ooh,
for sure.
I love that word.
Yeah.
Charcuterie.
Yeah. All right. I'm getting hungry. I think we should move back into probably the least appetizing case that I've probably ever covered on this podcast.
Speak for yourself.
Let's get there. Yeah. Well, Blaze, in all, about 226 of the bodies that were found on the Tri-State Crematory property were identified, but 113 of them never were, even to this day. So police start to notify family members about what they had discovered on the Tri-State Crematory property, including the eventual positive identification of their family members. Investigators asked the family to bring their loved ones' remains and ashes to be tested so they can find out what they really are, right? Because at this point, people are just wondering, what do I have on my mantle or on my neck, whatever it was.
Right.
And they find out through that testing that the cremations that had been placed into urns, turned into necklaces, or otherwise, were actually a combination of wood shavings and concrete dust.
Come on. I don't know what I would do in that moment. And if I found out that the urn with grandma was actually just sawdust and concrete stuff.
But what do you even do with that, right?
Throw it away.
True. I mean, I guess you have to, right? I mean,
you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
I mean, but
yeah.
It must be so emotionally complicated though, right? Because if you have that up on the shelf somewhere and thinking that grandma or Uncle Joe or whoever is up there, and for all these years, and then you find out, oh, just kidding. And then you have to throw it away. How do you?
Yes. I mean,
I can't imagine.
All jokes aside, it would be really tough to reconcile with something that you had been looking at and revering and thinking was a loved one for so long to find out that it's not. I bet some people maybe on some level probably didn't believe it. And then you have to think of the 100 or so people whose bodies of their loved ones were never identified. So, what do they get?
Who never got that closure. Yeah, that's so true. And, you have to probably imagine, right? To a certain extent that it's okay, even though they weren't, definitively identified, they were around the same time period, they died a couple of years ago. And so, odds are, right?
Yeah.
In all, reality and, probability here, it's they were probably among them, right? And they just couldn't for sure be told for sure. They're probably the older ones too, which again it's just one of those situations where it's it gets brought back up and it's oh my god, which I don't know which one would be worse, right? If it was my loved one died a year ago and I don't really know for sure, or if it's 20 years ago and it gets brought back up and then you're okay, well, that's crazy, but at least I'm kind of past that.
Yeah.
I've mourned that. So it's not a thing to bring back up necessarily. I don't know. I just can't, I simply can't imagine what these people are feeling at this point is the whole idea, right?
Yeah, me too. I don't I feel for them.
Big time. Well, that was just the loved ones who, again, had remains to turn over. Among the ones whose loved ones had been identified, there were still more than 100 families who never found out with 100% certainty what happened to their loved ones. And with that, investigators were putting Ray Marsh on notice. They arrested him and charged him on, ready for this, Blaze, 787 felony charges, including abusing a corpse, burial, service-related fraud, and theft by deception.
Pack it up, Mary. The evidence literally is stacked against you in your backyard. You had a good run.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you do? You gotta look at those charges and say, yeah, you got me.
I just, how do you even pursue those charges though? Like one at a freaking time.
Yeah.
700, almost 800 charges. Like, damn.
I mean, in my mind, I would go for the abusing a corpse because that's going to be the most easiest because those bodies are literally right there.
I mean, I feel like because I kind of disagree. I think that the strongest probably charge here is that it is the fraud thing, right? Because if you're selling, hey, come get your loved ones cremated here, and you're clearly not doing that. You know what I mean? Like abusing a corpse comes next, but I feel like the obvious thing here is the blatant fraud.
Yeah, but you could also argue that he gave them something. He gave them a urn.
Yeah, telling them that it was their loved ones and it wasn't.
Yeah, but I don't know.
And frankly, again, this is probably not super relevant, but across state lines too, right? So that is totally different.
Oh.
If you're doing this, engaging, that brings it to a totally different level of yikes.
Okay, so obviously Ray is in a lot of trouble, but he had obviously taken over the business from Tommy. So does he get charged as well because it could be negligence since he's still part of it? Maybe?
Yeah, well, and again, so Tommy ran the business 20 years ago too, right? And that's around the time that they're thinking that this dates back to, natural question. But Tommy actually ended up dying in 2003, and he was never charged with anything related to the tri-state crematory. But interestingly, investigators may have actually been able to stop this a long time ago, because they had actually been tipped off about this more than a year before the dog walker called police.
Okay, so that was back in 2002 that the original police call came. So Tommy, in theory, could have been around, could also been in theory charged if this happened 20 years ago and he was still running the business. So police, what's the gig? What's the team, Mary?
Well, and that's fair too, but I think the easiest sell here, right, is you always want to go for the low hanging fruit in terms of prosecuting stuff, and again, he was super sick at this point, so probably not worth your time, potentially. And that's at least probably the theory that they're going, or the thought process that they're going with here. But because Ray definitely knew what was on the property, right, and so that's the low hanging fruit that they're going for.
So so the dog walker calls it in 2002. In 2001? Was it a text message? How did they get informed, but they were just LOL?
Yeah, so in October of 2000, this is when it happened, and a driver for an oil company actually saw decomposing bodies on the property while making a delivery to the crematory. The driver did the right thing, though. He reported it to his boss, who reported it to police, and whether police actually ended up physically going out to the property or not is a little unclear, but what is clear is they didn't take any action at all. Police called this a, quote, regulatory issue, not a criminal one, and so they didn't take any action at the time.
So you just see dead bodies hanging out outside a building, obviously a crematorium. I don't know. Maybe we just still swing by, give a little knock, knock, knock.
Yeah.
Hey, Ray.
Well, yeah.
What's up?
Right. And I guess I'm picturing this through their eyes too, right? Where it's okay, you get this and you're okay, a crematorium has dead bodies.
But
not exactly
outside.
Breaking news. Correct. But I'm wondering if they're just okay, well, it's clearly not being done properly, but it seems again, the state regulates that. So it's if it, it's not up to local police to do this. To your point, with that being said, like if there's regulatory issues going on here specifically with dead bodies and which are biohazards,
right,
then maybe just swing by and say and like see what's going on, so that way you can go to police and to the state and say, hey, like, you know, be the one who, like, your mandatory reporters
right.
as police with this type of situation.
Go to the state with the dead body, knock, knock, knock. Hey, this was outside of a crematorium. Can we do something about it?
That is one way to do it.
As the police, they have to listen to you, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You think so anyway.
That's my thoughts. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, so, yeah. So they didn't do anything. So what next? What now? We wait?
Well, that kind of, yeah. You know, but that wasn't all either, though, Blaze, because they had actually been called about the property again. In November 2001, so just 3 months before the crematory was shut down, the Atlanta Environmental Protection Agency had received an anonymous tip from someone who was walking in the woods again near the Tri-State Crematory when they came across decomposing bodies. They immediately called police, who did show up this time, actually, and searched the woods, but they didn't end up finding any bodies.
There's okay, obviously we know more than what they knew. Littered across this area.
Correct.
I feel like there was less area not covered by bodies. Like they were just, how do you not see them?
And most of them, like, again, so they initially found 49 bodies is what they say when they first showed up in February 2002.
Yeah.
And so, like, the way I picture this happening, right, is like those 49 bodies are just like scattered like in open view, and then every door they opened up, like they just, and every time they like dug up a new hole, like they found more bodies.
Yeah.
And so point being is like there aren't like 339 bodies just like
there
about.
Yeah.
But like 49 bodies is still a lot of bodies, you know?
So again, where do we go from here? What's happening at this Tri-State Crematorium that has allowed this to happen?
Well, Blaze, the explanation here actually may be even more insane than the actual crime. Crime Over Wine is proud to support Emancipet. Today, there are over 60 million beloved pets across the country whose families cannot access or afford veterinary care. With your help, Emancipet is changing that. Emancipet is a nonprofit that offers low-cost vet care for those who need it most. They rely on donations to keep their costs low for pet families across the country. You can support Emancipet's mission at emancipet.org. Ray Marsh tells investigators, and the local sheriff actually relays this explanation to local media, that the incinerator was old at the crematory and had stopped working. Ray said that he couldn't afford to fix the incinerator, and things had just gotten out of hand way too much for him. He got behind and eventually just resorted to just stacking the bodies up around the property as he waited for years to figure things out.
So did he just think that one day all the bodies would be gone?
I don't really know. And like, again, like this explanation is kind of odd, right? Because it's like, if your incinerator, like if this is really your explanation here, and like, and you think that it's okay to like, to stack up the bodies, like out and about the way that you did, then like maybe stop taking them in, which he clearly didn't do, right? So like that explanation is just odd to me, right? It doesn't fully explain the thing at all. Like, and I could like sympathize with that to a certain extent if the incinerator was old and like, you know, you had like 20 of them, you were already backed up, you were the only person burning these bodies in all of the tri-state area, and you just, it was just whoa. But like, you clearly knew by the time the 100th body, you know, had to be stacked up outside, that like this was going to be a problem, and you still took them in.
Right, for 20 years. You just were like, you know what? Back up the truck. This one, there's a plot right here for old Muriel from Oak Street.
Knowing darn well you were going to have to, you know, stuff them in the shed or stuff them in the vault or whatever the heck.
Because again, I mean, it gets hot in Georgia.
Sure
You're
does.
20 minutes away. Not hot enough to melt a body. And then you got the bones.
Yeah.
Wild. These people...
Sure is.
Y'all be wilding out in Georgia.
Well, this explanation may not have actually been able to hold much water, because investigators later said that the incinerator was actually working just fine when it was tested after this whole investigation, but later it was determined to actually have had some faults to it, but like still mostly operable. But there's a more logical explanation to this that's later presented in court, so definitely hold that thought. We're going to get to it. As Ray prepares to go to trial, he starts getting into more and more legal trouble related to this whole regional scandal that had gone national at this point. The funeral homes sued the Tri-State Crematory for fraud, since the crematory continued doing business with them, knowing the building situation Ray had been dealing with. More than 1,700 family members joined a class action lawsuit against the crematory, some of whom had never gotten official confirmation that their loved one had been found at the crematory, but who had presented evidence that the likelihood was very high given the time period and the number of bodies found on the property, like we were saying before.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess I'm curious what faults they did determine, because if they said it tested fine, but then there were some faults, like maybe it wasn't getting to the appropriate temperature.
Yeah, that's kind of how I picture, or maybe like a button, didn't work 100% of the time, or that kind of thing. Like, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know the crematory technology and how advanced it's become, and if anything has changed. I mean, I imagine that since the early 2000s, things have improved.
So, since 2002, I imagine
some
changes.
But it blows my mind that, again, fine, hey, we take in a body, we realize we can't burn it. Hey, let's just maybe stop and not do this for 20 years.
Yeah.
Wild. All right.
Yeah.
Keep telling me.
In mid-2004, Blaze, Ray Marsh pleaded guilty to all of the charges, accepting a plea deal from the federal prosecutors.
Wow.
In the trial, his attorneys walked back that original theory that the reason that this all had happened was because of a faulty incinerator. Instead, they presented evidence that Ray may have done this all because he was sick and not in the right mindset.
So they're pleading insanity?
No, not fully.
Okay, but just like not in the right mindset.
Correct.
Okay. That is so hard to prove if they're not truly sick. Like, from the little bit of knowledge that I have, it's just, you can fake it, but they know you're faking it. So, like, what? I guess so. You know what? It's all or nothing. A Hail Mary.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, go for it. But, like, when you say not right and sick, what do you mean by that? Because I have said insanity, and that wasn't right.
Yeah. Oh, definitely not exactly what they were going for here. But attorneys had argued that Ray had been experiencing mercury toxicity, and his father, Tommy, had been experiencing that too. And that may have been the reason why he died, actually, is what they say in court. The attorney said that a faulty ventilation system at the crematory had exposed Ray and Tommy to toxic levels of mercury that would have come from the actual act of cremation, specifically from the mercury fillings in people's teeth. Okay. The attorneys back that up by saying that Ray had reported that the more time he had spent away from the crematory, the more level-headed that he had been feeling, and the clearer he seemed to friends and family.
I want, like, actual proof. I want a blood sample at this point. If I'm one of these family members where, I don't know, my mother's body could be in a congealed mass with 10 other bodies. Like, I want proof. Because, you could say, as soon as he walked out of the crematorium, he was fine. Oh, that just happens to be, like, line up perfectly with the idea that you're creating, which is, obviously, he's not in the right mind in the crematorium. He stacks up bodies, but as soon as he leaves, he's fine. Like, it's just all too convenient to me, and I want proof.
Yeah, and I agree. And again, like, it doesn't super matter, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, because he ends up pleading guilty anyway, so, like, I guess who really cares? But like, to your point though, too, like for a loved one's family member, like you want to know the exact specific reason. So point being is I never really saw, like a blood sample that was like presented in court. Like I never saw that specifically, but I would imagine if they went through a whole trial and like tried to find him guilty, like through a jury process and all that stuff, like they would have had to have done that. You know what I mean? Like otherwise, like who's going to believe you, to your point?
I would have thought outside the box to prove it to my people who had lost family members, but go on.
Sure. No, I agree. No, I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And I think but again, like, I think that it was to the point of like, okay, like he's pleading guilty. So like, why even, like, who cares what the real reason is as long as he admits that he actually did it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but, and like that kind of stuff will make you do crazy stuff.
Oh,
I don't
I'm sure.
really know if it'll make you stack up a bunch of bodies for 20 years. Well, attorneys, also clarified that nothing, quote, untoward happened to the bodies that were found on the property of the Tri-State Crematory besides them just simply not being cremated. But either way, Ray is convicted and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and 75 years of probation. And Ray gives a statement at his sentencing that's really interesting, to say the least. Blaze, I'm hoping you're going to be able to read this.
I will. Okay, so quote, "For those of you who may have come here today looking for answers I cannot give you. Not for lack of a desire to get those answers, but the lack of an answer. To those individuals who were genuinely harmed emotionally as a result of my actions, I apologize." I mean, this is just empty air. Like, this means nothing to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. But, I do think it does kind of, to me, support and or, speak to, from his perspective, the idea that he was simply not in his right mindset at the time of this whole thing happening. And, now that he's, away from the mercury, hypothetically speaking, now he's, okay. And it's just, I don't know what I was thinking.
I'm gonna ask you this, though, and we can't dwell too much on it. Okay, so it says that when he left the crematorium, he was more level-headed. He's not living in the crematorium. So when he left work every single day and saw the stacks and stacks on stacks of bodies, did he not think, maybe this is bad?
Yeah, you would think that you would go back. Correct. You would think you'd go back and take care of it. You're definitely right about that.
How in the wrong mindset is he? If you're thinking level-headed and you see those bodies, then you know that this is bad. Right. I don't believe him. I don't believe it was malicious. I just don't think that he's not in the right mind. I just think he just got it over his head.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I don't really fully understand the thought process here because he clearly wasn't cremating that many bodies if he had more than 300 of them out at his property that weren't cremated. And so I guess I don't really understand where the toxicity came from if he clearly wasn't doing it, which again, so but to be fair, we did say at the beginning of the episode that that between 1996 and 2002 they took in an estimated 2,000 bodies, and so there are what, quick math, 1,600 or so not accounted for, and so therefore you probably assume that they were cremated properly. Right?
You know what? I took a lot of math in college, but I'm not going to try to do it right here on this podcast. Thank you.
You listen. Everyone listens to this podcast knows that I am not good at math.
I'm a simple addition subtraction girly right here.
Yeah. Same. But Ray and the Tri-State Crematory ended up settling with the funeral homes that were suing them civilly for $36 million. And the families end up taking their cut from that payout. They, dropped their class action lawsuit that they were pursuing separately from this lawsuit. Ray is released from prison in 2016 and ended up earning a master's and a doctorate degree in theology from behind bars. Under the conditions of his probation, Ray was prohibited from profiting financially from the crime with an $8 million penalty attached if he does. He was also required to write apology letters to the victims' families and the general public. And Blaze, I was hoping you could read this for us too.
Oh, Jesus. All right. So he sent these out to everybody, or this is just to the community?
So he sent individual letters. He was required to send individual letters to the family members. And then he published this one, not published, but wrote this one separately to the general community.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought millions of families got this letter. Okay. So quote, "To my community, I humbly and very respectfully acknowledge the hurt and pain my actions have caused. I sincerely apologize. Moving forward, I can assure everyone that my life and deeds will not only prove the sincerity of my words, but my desire to lead a life that is worthy of this community. I am thankful to so many who have welcomed me home, wished me well, prayed for me, and are giving me the opportunity to return to my family and this community. Prayerfully yours, Brent Marsh."
Yeah, and so his legal name is Brent, and he goes by Ray, to clarify that last point.
Again, this doesn't mean anything. I mean, obviously, moving forward, I can assure everyone that my life and deeds will not only prove my sincerity, but my desire to leave a life. You legally can't do this again, so shut up. So, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Be a theology teacher?
Yeah, right.
Woo!
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, like here's kind of where I landed on this whole thing, right? Where it's like,
okay,
like this is clearly like a real like messed up situation, right? Like,
yes,
like he did a real gross thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I say all of that to set up the fact that like it, I would hope anyways that he, clearly saw the error of his ways, right? And like, wanted to be a much more productive member of society as a result of that.
Yes.
Because his whole reputation, again, we set up this whole thing about how, at the beginning of this episode, about how well respected him and his dad and his whole family were. And that's all gone, right? Like his reputation is ruined. Not like by his own doing, to be crystal clear, but like, point being is that like I see like I feel this a little bit in terms of just like he according to this anyways, like he wants to move on from this and be, a productive member of the community again to whatever extent he's able to. At least that's what he's saying. I have to believe his words to a certain extent, right?
I mean, yes, I believe in giving those coming out of prison a second chance. They obviously deserve it. However, I think that we also have to look at kind of the circumstances, not eliminate their chances to have a second chance, but like there are certain people I believe that maybe have a better chance of fulfilling that second chance than others. I don't know if this person is that. I mean, I wish him well. I don't wish him any ill will. I just have a lot of questions about how you can let bodies stack up for 20 years knowing that your incinerator is broken and you're not doing anything, to my knowledge, to try to fix it. So
agreed.
I would need to know more personally about, what is that? What do we say? Mercury poisoning? And its effects on the body to know, because if it was because of that, I think he gets a little bit more of a pass. But I also, if family and friends are saying he's more level-headed when he leaves, well, you're coming back and you're seeing these bodies. Where are we going from here?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have to believe simply and out of the goodness of my heart that like the mercury poisoning is the reasoning here, right? Like I have to. Otherwise, like what the actual fuck, right? Like that's all I have to say about that. Well, Walker County's Tri-State Crematory has been the subject of a movie called Sakanaga, which starred locals of Walker County, including some people whose parents' bodies were found on the property. It was also the inspiration behind episodes of Law & Order and CSI. Today, the bodies found on the property are buried at the Tennessee-Georgia Memorial Park Cemetery in Rossville, Georgia, 20 minutes north from where their bodies had rusted for months and sometimes years in some cases. The sheriff then is still the sheriff today, actually, and he says he has regular contact with Ray and that he's doing fine, recognizes his crime, and has done his time and is ready to get on with the rest of his life. But Ray says that he still doesn't know why he did it.
I'm glad that the sheriff is still the sheriff, because that could maybe bring like a little bit of clarity to the community that are still maybe looking for answers. Like the sheriff is still there. He still keeps in contact with the person. If there is any developments, he can obviously pass it along. Is there going to be any? Obviously not. He doesn't know why he did it. But you know what? It's kind of like, I'm going to draw a parallel, but they're obviously not the same. It's almost kind of like a hoarding situation where like hoarders don't know until you have to like intervene and say, hey, your whole house is just completely filled with crap. Maybe it was kind of along those same lines where it's like, it was 1, then it was 2, then it was 10, and it just kind of stacked up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I gather from that. And that it was just like, again, like it was just too far out of control, I guess. And like, again, like I don't know if he was still cremating bodies during this whole time, right? Like math says yes, but like
the bodies say no.
Potentially says no. The bodies say no, right? So like I don't know. Maybe it was just one of those situations where it was just like okay, like I'm getting 10, but I can only do 5 today. Like, like it's so like I don't know.
Well, and you hear about these other criminals who burn bodies in fire pits. There's I mean, I'm not saying that he should have done it, but I'm just saying there are ways.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Frankly, fair.
Interesting. That is a wild one.
Sure
you
is.
Bring me some wild cases. And I'm glad I go into it raw with no information.
Well, that is all that we have for you this week, Blaze. Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay. It's been a pleasure. You don't have to do the upward inflection, making it sound like a question. No, it has been a pleasure. I know the listeners at home have obviously heard me before, but me and Liam, we have a life outside of this podcast, and we do talk occasionally.
Oh, yeah, we're besties.
Yes.
Well, Blaze, tell everyone where they can find you and your work and all of your unhinged Twitter content.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, my Twitter is Blaze M. Keller. My Instagram is private, but it's blaze.png, because I'm a transparent person. And that's it. That's where you can find me.
All right. Love it. Well, Blaze, it's always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Obviously, of course. And thank you again so much for coming on. And thank you all so much for listening. We are going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you are just loving this podcast and are just looking for a way to tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help people discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek. Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And I'm Andy Santoro. Next week, I'm joining the Crime Vineyard, and we have a case of a freezing Canadian night when a lively young man with a world ahead of him seemed to vanish without a trace.
It's a heartbreaking case, and we will tell you everything that we do know next Wine Wednesday on another episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network.